Hi, Shel Phillips here, shining a light in the dark corners of CMMC. Had a meeting the other day with some of my friends from the CMMC community. I manage a peer group, and during the conversation, one of the peers, an assessor named Brian Hubbard, gave us a rundown of what an assessment looks like, the steps that he takes and the things to expect. We had a little Q&A. Thought it might be interesting for you to see the process and to get familiar with what's to be expected. So here's the recording of most of that conversation. Today we have Brian Hubbard, the CEO of Evolved Cyber. He's in charge of so many things. So he's here today to tell us about the process that an assessor team will go through from the engagement point clear through to recommendation to Cyber AB of a past organization seeking certification. So today, Brian, give us sort of the overview of the process. You don't have to give away any of your methodologies, your secret sauce, if you will, but just give us the kinds of things that you sort of categorically do, and so we can sort of be prepared as those who are going for certification or those of us who actually are doing assessments. It will be really helpful. So I turn it over to you, Brian.
Sure, Shel, thanks. Yeah, I've started to outline a 12-step program for starting from, do I even want to do CMMC, all the way through operating a certified environment. So decided it needed to be a 12-step program because there is a denial phase and all that stuff. And it's mainly targeted at MSPs and what MSPs need to do, but it really applies to OSCs in general. That's organizations seeking certification, whether they be MSPs or whether they be DIB contractors. So the first thing is, when we get to this stage, I wanted to kind of talk through just really what happens when you're ready for assessment. And there's 9 steps that go before that. So I'm not going to talk about those 9-step program, but if you want to talk through those 9 steps, you can join the MSP CyberX, MSP Cybersecurity Exchange, yep. MSPCyberX.com, and join in that conversation. But this assumes that you've built out your operation. You believe that you are CMMC compliant. You're operating in accordance with your policies and procedures. You're documenting things all along the way, and your employees understand you've built a culture in your organization of compliance. Once you're at that stage, you believe that, for whatever it took you to get to that belief, you believe that you're 800-171 compliant, you're ready for CMMC assessment against those standards. So you're engaging a C3PO, a CMMC's third-party assessment organization. You'll ask the C3PO for a couple things. You'll ask them for an artifact request list. What are they going to expect to see from you? So once they have that, then that'll detail down to the CMMC assessment objective level. So not just the 110 practices that are in CMMC, but down to the 320 assessment objectives of what they expect to see from you. What does the assessor want? What are they going to be expecting to have in front of them as evidence ahead of time? What kind of people are they going to want to talk to? That sort of thing. That gives you kind of an understanding then about your side of the planning process. The SSP, the system security plan, is going to be key to all of this, right? So the system description and that is key. The certified, the CMMC third-party assessment organization will assign a lead assessor. That lead assessor will ask you for that SSP and probably any other documentation you have to offer, like system diagrams, data flow diagrams, that sort of thing that detail out the organization and your scope of the assessment. So that'll include things like, how many sites are involved, how many parts of how much your organization actually involved, what systems are involved in your boundary of your assessment boundary. And you'll provide the C3PO with your policies and don't have to, at this point, this is sort of the first phase, this is the planning phase. You don't have to necessarily provide any detailed evidence at this point, but you'll provide your SSP and high level policies and that sort of thing to the lead assessor for review.
Brian, just a
Go
sec
ahead.
right there.
Mm-hmm.
How is that delivered? Do you have a secure location that it dumps into, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So the C3PO will give you instructions on how to deliver that to them. It's typically, like maybe it's a secure SharePoint site. Maybe, the C3PO may have a place that you deposit things, or you may have a site that you're going to put things and invite the C3PO to come in to look at it on your site. Either way works. It just depends on how you're working with the C3PO. Gotcha. Right. So again, the lead assessor is going to review all of that stuff, and then you're going to have a scoping call with the lead assessor. And that scoping call, you're going to basically, the lead assessor's goal in that is to talk everything through to you, make sure they fully understand the scope of your assessment, and to validate that it's covering everything it needs to cover. So for example, if during that call, you find out, hey, well, I'm using this ERP system and it's a cloud-based system. Oh, and yeah, I do store a CUI up in that thing, but I didn't list that in my SSP. Okay, that's going to change the scope, right, of the assessment. It's going to change the assessment boundary, and they'll probably ask you to make sure you update your documentation, your SSP. None of that stuff is set in stone at this point. This should be a couple of weeks before your assessment that all this is happening, at least a couple of weeks. On that scoping call too, they'll ask for additional information, make sure that you have everything you need. The goal for the lead assessor is, after that scoping call, is to go off and develop an assessment plan, right? So that assessment plan is going to lay out the schedule, lay out the approach, lay out everything for the assessment. They will interact with you, the OSC, on that, right? To make sure that, for example, if they lay out a schedule that says we're going to talk about AC on this day, we're going to talk about IA on this day, that you agree to that schedule, and you will have all of the right resources there at that time. And that's something to emphasize, is that during that you need to make sure if that your entire IT team is going to be off at an offsite for 3 days of the week of the assessment, that's probably the wrong week to have the assessment. And you may want to reschedule. So you need to take all those things in consideration, because the lead assessor isn't going to just talk to the people you want have in the room. They're not going to just, I've had organizations that, wow, this is just my compliance department has to be involved with this. No, we're going to want to talk to your IT team. We're going to want to talk to your HR team. We're going to want to talk to your facilities team. We're going to talk to individual users, potentially. So all of those folks, there needs to be kind of a process of availability of those folks. So you need to, during the assessment planning process, the lead assessor will work with you on getting all that stuff together.
So a quick question right there. Do those people that they're going to want to interview, do they have to be physically there, or can they be virtually there?
So there's going to be a variety of ways that these assessments happen, right? So there's, it may be all virtual. I have organizations that I work with that are 100%, they don't even have a physical location.
Gotcha.
And so those will be all 100% virtual. It may be a hybrid where, gotcha, you do, most of the controls are done virtually. Right. And then maybe there's a handful of controls in assessment objectives that have to be reviewed physically on site or require a physical inspection.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a hybrid like that. Or, I mean, if all parties, agree they want it to be all physically on site. I know during the Joint Surveillance Program, DIBCAC likes to be physically on site. C3POs will most likely have a much more cost-effective approach to that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and quite frankly, it's a lot easier to say, hey, just conference in, somebody and have them grab them, as opposed to they have to run down to the conference room or they have to run to a different building, that sort of thing. So it's just much more effective all around to do as much of it virtually as possible. So I'm sure that will continue, as it's certainly done. The majority of the assessments are done that way now, and think that'll continue. There might be, like, for example, the assessments I've done, there was a 1 day on site. That was it. So one of the days, one of the assessment team members goes on site and does the physical inspections. All right. So the key is the plan, after the plan is done, after the plan is kind of vetted out, they should be asking for approvals, right? So the C3PO will have to approve it, but also the OSC should approve it.
Right.
So you get a chance to say, well, this plan is just not going to work for me. We just can't do it this way. And that's okay. There's also going to be a readiness review, in which the lead assessor will take a look at the evidence that you're providing, and determine. They're not going to go deep on the evidence. They're going to look to see that there's an existence of evidence. All right. So they're not going to be doing an assessment at that point, but they're going to be looking to see that, does it appear that you have all your ducks in a row? Basically, this says, yeah, you're going to meet these controls, and they're going to look control by control and make sure you're covering all the bases. That you at least have some evidence that would indicate that you're ready to have this assessment. Because at that time, and any ethical C3PO will not start an assessment if they don't think you're ready, right? Because if I know going in that you're going to fail, I should never start that assessment.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean it's not going to cost you some money if you get to that point and you're not, because you're already paying for phase one, right?
Right. Well, let me ask you this, right at this very point. How do you shop for a C3PAO? I mean, how deep do you go before you say, okay, we agree or we don't agree? Do you actually share your documentation with several C3POs?
No. So yeah, that is a great question. But at this point, before you get under contract and have NDAs and things in place, you're not sharing anything with them, other than maybe a higher level descriptions of your system, right? About what is involved in your system, how big is it, how complex is your organization, how many sites do you have? Because that's what they need to do to cost the assessment, right? So you're going to share. They're going to probably have questionnaires. They should have questionnaires, like intake forms, that allow you to provide enough insight into your organization. There might be some calls, right, with the prospective C3POs to get their proposals. But at that point, you're not providing the SSP or anything like that.
Is it likely that three CPAOs would scope the assessment the same way? In other words, without getting into documentation and network diagrams and stuff, is it likely that they would probably all come up with the same conclusions of a scope?
But yeah, I mean, once they get into the SSP, for certain, they should be doing it the same way. But you mean on the proposal phase?
Yeah, proposal phase.
Well, I mean, that remains to be seen. So I don't really have any track record with that to know how that's going to work out.
Okay. I just happen to think about when you're going deep about, okay, here's the schedule and we're well into it. I thought, wait a second, how much do we share beforehand? What's the intake process and Because you don't have to go with the first one you find. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, so at this point, so when we start phase one, my first bullet was, you've engaged the C3PAO.
Right.
That whole acquisition process that you went through to find that C3PO, I didn't cover any of that.
Yeah.
Right. That's
gotcha.
whole
Okay.
different.
Sorry to sidetrack.
No, that's okay. At this point in phase one, you're under contract. You're paying for this service. Right.
There we go. Okay.
And so you're expending resources at this point.
Great.
Okay. So we have a plan. We've done a readiness review. Lead assessor says, looks good, let's do it. And you get into the actual assessment. That's that's phase two. And of course, this is where it seems like that first section was really long. Well, this next section isn't that long, but it's and it doesn't have that many bullets, but it's pretty complex, right? So at this point, you're going to provide the C3PO with all the evidence that they need. So they provided you that artifact request list that you asked for.
Mm-hmm.
So you are providing evidence against every single practice, and preferably you're providing evidence against every single assessment objective. Right. Now, if you really want to make the assessor's life easy and be nice and have a most successful engagement, you also provide them a requirements traceability matrix. What's a requirements traceability matrix, right? It says, okay, here's the assessment objective. Here are the documents I'm providing you as evidence for that particular assessment objective.
Okay.
So they know where to look. Because if you just give them, I did have this happen to me. I had, a company dumped 2,000, well, no, it was 3,000. 3,000 artifacts. Now they think they organized it. But what they really did is they just duplicated a bunch of documents, and they put anything in the kitchen sink that they thought might relate to that, they threw it in there. It was really annoying, and it caused a lot of delays because we couldn't find things. So it's best to clearly lay out, this is what the documentation we're going to provide for this particular assessment objective. It's okay to provide screenshots and things like that. But I say don't spend a lot of energy on trying to get every single screenshot for every single thing, because the assessors should be asking you to demonstrate the system live anyway.
Gotcha.
Okay. So at that point, then they might say, oh, hey, can you take a screenshot of that and put it in evidence? That's fine. But I'd say focus on policies, focus on procedures, and then artifacts that might be useful, like tickets that have for a particular procedure, or those kind of things, like things that don't change that often, like training records, right? Those kind of things you can certainly provide ahead of time, because it's not going to change too much. I still may ask you to show me if you have a learning management system, show me your learning management system and how the system tracks those people. So you may still have to demonstrate some of that stuff. Assessors, it's really important to understand that assessors are free to expand on who and what they examine. So if you do provide a screenshot, don't argue with the assessor about providing a live demonstration. All right, because that happens a lot. Well, I provided you a screenshot and it's in this file. I was like, yeah, that's cool. I'm sure you did. Show me in the system anyway.
Right.
Because you took that screenshot 2 months ago.
Yeah.
What's the system look like today? That's what I want to know.
And you photoshopped it, and it's all cool.
Yeah. And a lot of times you get screenshots, and you can't tell what system it came from.
Right.
Right. What is that a screenshot of? Yes, I know it's Active Directory.
Yep.
But you can't really tell. Or they'll give me a screenshot of a inventory control system, and it'll just be the inventory screen, but I can't tell what system that's from.
Yeah.
So it's really not helpful. Yeah, Bobby, go ahead.
So we did a visibility matrix on our gap, and we actually had it mapped out what type of evidence we were expecting to present and whether it was going to be screen shared or just an artifact, a document, things like that.
Yeah.
And our approach has been to kind of have that be part of the discovery process of the C3PO to see their level of comfort with what our beliefs on how we would approach things so that we have alignment. Have you seen individuals try to do that in the assessment process to try to say, okay, that way we know the people we're going to talk with, or we know we're going to be doing these types of screen sharing? Have you seen people go to that detail before and as well as included as part of the selection process?
Yeah, I mean, so not down to the individuals, but I definitely have gotten, really good requirements traceability matrices that really helped. But yeah, laying out you should have that. I mean, that's a great point, Bobby. You should have that really in your preparation. You should know who it is that's going to answer the questions on each and every assessment objective, and have that person ready, coach them on what it is how they're going to go through it. And make sure that they're ready to answer questions.
Now, does the assessment team isolate those individuals, and so that like someone couldn't be sitting in the room coaching, if you will, like a consultant or something like that?
I mean, I suppose they could if that was their style. Most or none of the assessments I've ever been involved with ever do that.
Yeah.
And you may have a situation that, depending on you may have a large assessment team or something, and maybe the assessor you're dividing up into different rooms, so that you can do things in parallel. So if you're doing that, that's a dance that has to be really well coordinated, because a lot of times the same person needs to be in both rooms at the same time, and it just ends up screwing up schedules. So it's difficult to orchestrate, but it's sometimes that's effective. So you wouldn't know what room one is saying versus room two.
Right.
Okay. Or we may, assessor may want to talk to an individual employee. Hey, show me your login process. What do you do with CUI when you have it?
Right.
That kind of thing. And they may, depends on the assessor style, but they may do that independently, kind of isolated, or it may not matter to the assessor, because the employee's not going to get fired if they say the wrong thing.
Right. There's no hard and fast, fast rule about it.
There's no hard and fast rule.
All right.
And I don't think the new CAP is going to change that. The new CMMC assessment process is going to change any of that.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So the key there is having, again, like I said, have the people available, have them ready. Okay. So the assessor is going to march down through all the assessment objectives. So in order to meet a practice, you have to have met every single assessment objective. So they have to have evidence, and they have to have an understanding about what they have to document. Really, what is it they examined? Who did they talk to? What tests did they run to confirm that that assessment objective was in support, that assessment objective was met or not met. Right. So again, this is formal assessment. At the end of that assessment, they're not going to tell you, hey, you didn't meet this, and here's how you fix it. They're just going to say, you didn't meet this, and here's why you didn't meet it.
Right.
Right. You're going to have to go out and come up with a solution to that. The assessor can't provide consulting during the assessment. So that's really, that's phase two. We're going to go through all of those things. We're going to, at the end of each day, usually towards the evening, we'll go from the majority of the day, and then we'll take maybe an hour gap, maybe a half hour gap, depending on the team. The assessment team gets together, talks about what they've saw that day, provides, kind of the scoring for those controls that they talk through. And then we'll have I like to call it a hot wash, others call it evening checkpoints or whatever. Each day we'll have a hot wash, talk through the results from that day. So like if there's something that is, at that point we're calling them trending scores. So if something is trending not met, because I didn't really see this evidence or that evidence, that gives you an opportunity as the OSC to say, oh, wait a minute, you mean nobody showed you this? Oh, okay, let me go get that and I'll show it to you tomorrow.
Okay.
So that you can kind of reverse the trend, right, of any particular score. So that's really what happens during the course of the assessment period. I didn't cover in phase 2 also, there's a documentation review. Now, depending on the C3PO and how they schedule it out and how the assessment plan works, they should, and my teams, when I'm leading an assessment team, we always go through the documentation a day, 2 days before the assessment, right? Before the interview week, as I like to call it. It's not, I don't know what else to call it. When we're actually doing the interviews and examinations. But we go through the documentation ahead of time because if you don't go through the documentation ahead of time, it's just going to drag out the assessment process. So we try to review it, at least 2 days ahead of time, summarize what we think, because there's some things you can meet purely from your doc policies and procedures. So we might go through those and just like the SSP. I don't need to ask you questions about the SSP. I'm going to read it, right? Because none of the controls have anything to do with interviews. So I can satisfy some of those controls. That streamlines the interview week, right? So we can focus on the things that we need to have in demonstrations of and that sort of thing. So that's phase 2. And at that point, we've gone through all the assessment objectives. We've come up with a proposed score. We're going to no surprises. There should be no surprises at the OSC because we've talked through everything at the daily hot washes. And then phase 3, we're going to develop the report and deliver the assessment report. Bobby, you had a question? Hands up.
Yeah, you know me, I'm the inquisitive one.
Oh, good.
One of the things that has fascinated me about this, and I'm curious, is that when a lot of these C3POs, they're contracting CCAs to do the assessment, to be part of it. But the C3PO, they have to stay on budget time-wise because they got to pay you hourly, right? Yep. They've got to think about the amount of time it's taking to do this assessment. What type of guidance does the C3PO put to you as a contracted assessor have you seen about staying on track time-wise, and then what recourses do you have to then go back to the OSC and say, hey, man, you're killing me time-wise because you guys aren't prepared. It's taking me a lot longer. We're going to have to charge you more money. How does that, have you seen that go that way, and what kind of guide rails are around that?
Yeah, I mean, so it unless they did a really bad job up front of determining the complexity, or let's say we're in the middle of the assessment and we discover, wait a minute, there's this whole other set of systems, or there's this data center that you didn't tell us about during the scoping call, that needs to be part of this assessment. That's a change in scope. Okay, so that's at that point the lead assessor is probably going to say, okay, let's take a pause. And we need to talk to the C3PO, and because this whole new site or this whole new data center or this whole new piece of system is now in scope. It's either, if it's a minor thing, like, oh, there's this cloud-based system that we're using, and oh yeah, it's FedRAMP authorized. It's probably going to be a minor change. It's a problem with the SSP, right? Because that's a documentation change. They needed it. It's always been in scope, but they didn't tell us about it. They forgot about it, whatever. And they can add it to that's a documentation change. It may be a minor change if everything else accounted for it. So, it's really going to be a play it by ear kind of call on that. But any major changes to scope, then that would have to go back to the C3PO to renegotiate what the cost is going to be of the assessment.
But it does not negate anything that's been reviewed up to that point. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, so it may change some things, like, oh, wait a minute, you're using this whole other
Right.
set of systems, and it wasn't in the SSP. Now all of a sudden the SSP doesn't look too compliant to me, because it doesn't provide, it doesn't describe the boundaries properly. Right. So all of a sudden you may have been trending met, and all of a sudden, boop, you're trending not met.
Gotcha.
On some of those things. So it could have some ramifications on that.
Right.
Yeah. So and here I guess here's something I didn't cover in phase one on the getting the people ready. If you are an MSP supporting an OSC, right? Or if you're an OSC using an MSP, I guess I should say it that way too. You need to make sure that MSP is ready to be part of that assessment, right? Because they're doing things for you that are going to be in scope, right? Providing security protection, whatever, or maybe they're performing your SOC, SIM kind of duties, whatever the case may be. I don't want to talk to you about what they're doing. I'm going to talk to them about what they're doing, right? So now when it comes, CMMC comes, I might get some validation because that's MSP would have been certified at CMC level 2 before you ever got into the OSC assessment, in theory. But I'm still going to have to talk about the interface between the two organizations, right? So we're still going to have to know, okay, how is this being done, or if there's something that they're doing that's part of your process that's a little bit unique to your organization. They're still going to have to be involved in that communication, in that dialogue with the assessor. So that's something as MSPs need to be prepared for, and work with your clients on as they get ready for their assessments. Make sure they understand that, hey, there's extra hours of engineering time. You might need to add some because I'm going to have to be there for 2 days working with you exclusively. So there may be some costs there. So phase 3 is the reporting. That's when we wrap things up, kind of get everything ready. The OSC will have an opportunity to review the report. There is a reclama period that says, hey, we think you got this wrong. You can appeal to the C3PAO for a review. It'll go through a quality review at the C3PO, the whole assessment reports and everything else will too. And then, so that's phase 3. And then phase 4 is POAM. Let's say there's something that came up during the assessment, and it was something that you could or allowed to put on a plan of action and milestones. And you have to work it off within 180 days. Then that's phase 4. That POAM closeout period would be a phase 4 activity where the C3 you would have to pay, probably most likely pay the C3PO additional money to come back in and reassess those controls that you've had POAMs for and are wanting to close out. After phase 3, if your scores are appropriate, and we'll see what the cap says and the final rule says on what all the scores have to be and what controls can and can't be missed. You could be issued either a final certification or a conditional certification. The conditional certification is one that would have POAMs that are being worked out over. So within 180 days, you'd have to close out those POAMs. And then at that point, if the C3PO determines that you've met all 110 controls, you could be issued a final certification.
I got one more question.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I've not seen a lot of people talk about this, and we're approaching ours this way. We're going to be looking at, because you've got a human factor in this assessment process, someone's going to make a mistake at some point. Hopefully it won't negatively impact the met or not met. But if it did, and they failed, because it's part of the 60-ish% of straight fail, what are you seeing the C3POs approach that, like, how are they handling the, okay, well, you failed this one control, you crushed everything else, but you just made a boneheaded mistake. Feel bad for you, but it's still not met, so you're going to fail. How do you, is it a full page one rewrite as far as in cost wise? Like, how are you seeing C3POs handle that?
So I have to look in the future on that, right? After the final rule. If it holds out the way it's currently written, let's say you scored 105, that means you missed one 5-point control. Okay, the way the proposed rule is written, that's a fail. You have to go back to square one. Okay, let's say you score 109. That 1-point control that you missed, probably, most likely, can go on a plan of action milestones, and you can work it off for 180 days. So it could be a minor change. Maybe it's we didn't. We're running and we're doing Phillips encryption on our hard drives, but there's that one machine that we forgot to set the setting to Phillips mode. And that's a fail, right? And that's a 5-point requirement. So that's, or it could be a 3-point requirement. Actually, you could score 107 and still fail. So it could be something like that, which is really sucky when it comes to, kind of the fairness and equity of meeting an assessment. But that's the way it's trend. That's the way it looking is that the rule is going to come out during joint surveillance program. That's the one nice thing about the joint surveillance program. It doesn't matter whether it's a 1-point control or a 5-point control. You can still POAM it. But that's, right now it looks like that's going to go away when the rule drops. All right. So that's really it. And then, okay. I'm in the 12-step program. Step 12 is if you're an MSP that just went through all of that. Step 12 is sell because you are a unicorn. Right? There aren't going to be very many of you for a long time. Yep. So go for it and blow your market away. Yep. So that's really it, Shel.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that summary and for the rundown. Well, there you have it. I hope that conversation, though it was a bit long, I hope it helped you understand the process to kind of anticipate some of the things that might come your way, especially on who should be included and some of the questions about the fact that you could pick the assessor that you like and in advance of the assessment, and how some of that will go along. I hope it helps, and I'll see you next time.